Welcome. It is Tuesday evening, and here we are at the beginning of chapter 11. We started with verses 1 to 6 yesterday, but we are still just towards the beginning of it. There's a lot in this chapter that we really can go through, and it is quite an important chapter of the Bible, and it has brought so much comfort to people. I know that I have quoted stuff from this verse, this passage, this chapter, to people who were during times when they lose loved ones. It's not only about what Jesus could do, it's about who Jesus is. And we'll get to that in the next few lessons. Today it's lesson number 55, and we're going to go back and start with verse 1. We kind of covered verses 1 to 6, but to read in context, I'm going to read verses 1 to 16 right now. In John chapter 11, verse number 1 to verse number 16. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with the fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, to Jesus, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. And when Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again? You might remember that from previous chapters, especially chapter 9 and chapter 10 as well. And Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him. And I just want to point out that the word friend there is not just the usual word we might use. The word for friend in the Greek there is actually better translated, or it could be translated, and I think it's more descriptive. If you see the word friend there, we could pronounce it this way. We could translate it this way. Our beloved friend. The word friend there has a connotation of being beloved. Our beloved Lazarus. Our beloved friend Lazarus. It just shows the sense of love that Christ Jesus has for this man, Lazarus. We already saw, he said in the first couple of verses, that he loved Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. That family was special to him. They lived in Bethany, which was a very short distance from Jerusalem, as we'll see as we go on. So these things he said, and after that he said, Our beloved friend would be the way that word should translate, or could translate. Friend is correct, but it has more meaning than just our word friend. Our beloved friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Now remember, the messenger came and said he was sick. Well, now he's saying he sleeps, so the disciples hear that. And so this in verse 12 continues. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go that we may die with him. You see, they understood that going back to Bethany, which was right near Jerusalem, which is in the province of Judea, that's where the trouble was. That's where those Pharisees wanted to kill Jesus for blaspheming. Remember, they said, you being a man, make yourself to be God. And they picked up stones to stone him. And that happened on a couple of occasions. And so they were out to get Jesus, and the disciples knew that. So they voiced that twice. The first time, they voiced it as a concern. The second time, Thomas says, let's go and we'll die with him. Okay, let's look at this. Now, the interesting thing, too, is in verse 15, or 14, he says Lazarus is dead, because they think he meant literally sleeping. It seems like the Lord sees death as kind of like sleep, because to God, nobody dies. Our bodies will pass on. These bodies will. They die. But the person inside the body doesn't. So he's saying to him, he sleeps. Because death is not the end. I think that's what he's trying to say there. But that's okay if you don't think that's true. But that's what it seems like he's saying. But let's stick to what the facts are in the text. He says plainly, Lazarus is dead. And then verse 15 seemed always strange. Don't you think it's strange? He says, and I am glad for your sakes. Who would be glad that someone you loved is dead? Well, Jesus had a teaching involved here. And it wasn't just some head thing, teaching a head academic kind of teaching. It's a teaching of the soul. It's a teaching of who he really is. And I think in the world today, we often forget who he really is, because the world bombards us with its own ways and understanding of life. But life is really much more than it appears to be. So let's go into this right now. Let's go into this. Lazarus, my beloved friend. We just read John 11, verses 1 to 16. Let's think about this. The sisters send a messenger to Jesus who's not with them. He's a distance away. And Jesus says, this sickness is not unto death. But then we find out Lazarus is dead. The messenger comes back home. He finds Lazarus is already dead. Jesus' words would seem like empty words. He's finished saying it's not previously in the chapter, and then he says Lazarus is dead. The one to whom he spoke, remember, they sent a messenger to Jesus to say, your friend Lazarus is sick. They were imploring him to come and heal Lazarus. Yet Jesus would urge them to believe his word no matter what things look like. And that's where it gets difficult for us. That's where life throws us a curve. That's where our faith is tested. When we have to believe God's promise no matter what things look like. Suffering would be involved in this. Jesus knew that there'd be suffering involved. Jesus could have caused the sisters to avoid such emotional suffering and Lazarus so much physical suffering if he had just gone and healed him. Or even more than that, he could have healed him without going there. You recall in chapter 4, verse 44, he told the centurion, I believe it was, your servant is okay, go home. You go. And he found his servant was healed that very hour. Jesus just spoke the word from a distance. He could have done the same thing here, but he chooses not to because of the teaching of the soul. There is a spiritual lesson that has to get pounded into our hearts, not just in our heads. But there is something more important than our comfort and our immediate happiness is one of the lessons here. See, we think that the most important thing in life is comfort and happiness. God has bigger plans for us than that. It's nice to have comfort. It's nice to be comfortable. I like that. We all like that. Immediate happiness. We want instant gratification. It's just something we love. I love to get what I want. That makes me happy, and I want it now. I don't want to wait. Comfort and happiness. We think that's the purpose in life. God's idea is different than ours. And we see that here. There's going to be suffering. Even Jesus would emotionally suffer in this. As we see in verse number 35, when he sees Lazarus is in the tomb, when he arrives, we'll get to that, I'm jumping ahead a little, but when he arrives, he's going to be deeply, deeply distressed. See, God's love for his people is not like man's love. It's not like human love. God's love is not a pampering love. God's love is a perfecting love. His love for us is no guarantee that we will be exempt from problems and pain in life. Many times we go through different things and we say, well, where's God now? I shouldn't be going through. I believe in God. Or I've been pretty good person. I have tried to honor God. I have thought things like that myself. When things don't go right, I probably have said it myself, and that it wasn't right, because that's not what it's about. See, the Father in heaven loves his Son more than anything we could imagine, yet he allowed him to suffer greatly for a greater purpose. God has purpose, and suffering might be involved. As a matter of fact, Jesus promised it is involved. In the world you will have tribulation. That's his words. He says that later on in the gospel. Now there is danger here. In verse number 8, we look at verse number 8, it says, the disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you. And are you going to go there again, meaning to Judea? Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Bethany is the place where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived, and where Lazarus was sick, and ultimately where Lazarus died. But if you look at verse number 16, remember Thomas, who was called twin, he said, his fellow disciples, let us go also that we may die with him. So there was danger. Even Thomas reckoned. Remember doubting Thomas, who later would doubt? He himself saw the danger, as did the other disciples in verse number 8. So there's danger involved here. But Jesus knew there was danger also, but he had to fulfill the purpose that was at hand. Verse number 9. And Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. And you know what? He's the light of this world. But he was going to fulfill the Father's purpose. And you know, I just want you to understand that persecution becomes irrelevant when you're doing God's will. It should become irrelevant. It should not be a deterrent to doing God's will because somebody is persecuting you for the gospel's sake. Verse 10 to 15. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. And then he says, our friend Lazarus sleeps, which he meant he had died. We see this word used this way. Paul uses the word sleep when he means dead as well. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13 to 17, he said, we shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed. He's talking about the Lord's return. He meant death, as you read the context. So that is not the only place in the Bible where this is used as a metaphor for dying. Jesus said, our friend Lazarus sleeps. Our beloved friend, remember that word there in the Greek. Our beloved friend Lazarus sleeps. But verse number 15 is really the thing that really, like I said before, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes. Now, Jesus shows that teaching his followers to believe in him is more important than our temporal desires, even the healing of Lazarus. What do you mean just to believe in him? Why is that so important? It's important for people to understand. It's important for us to understand the very power of Jesus Christ, the very love of Jesus Christ, the very passion of Jesus Christ. This is very important. It's so important. It's more important than our comfort. It was more important than healing Lazarus. He wanted his disciples to see something. You'll notice what he said again. I am glad for your sakes that I wasn't there to heal him. I'm glad for you. Who's he talking to? His disciples, his followers. I was glad for your sake. Some things happen in our lives because we've got to learn how to trust God. Notice he says here, I'm glad I wasn't there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. That's in verse 15. John 11, verse 15. Nevertheless, let's go to him. I am glad. Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes. That always strikes me as strange, because that's just the way I think. That's the way humans think. It seems strange. I was glad for your sakes. Jesus is trying his disciples, his followers, that they must believe in him more than just a teacher, more than just a prophet, more than just a rabbi, that he himself is not a teacher, that he himself is the source of life. This is like really one of the most potent passages in the Bible, in my opinion, as we move on, where Jesus comes out and he tells us who he really is. He is the resurrection, and we'll get to that. It's not that he can do resurrection or that he could perform resurrection, but that he is the resurrection. That's the lesson. And we must live by faith and not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. We walk by faith, not by sight. This situation seemed hopeless, yet the sisters knew that Jesus was the master of every situation. Psalm 50 verse 15 says, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. Why would you glorify? Because you will see who he really is. The situation seemed hopeless. You know, unless you're in a hopeless situation, you're never going to see a miracle. If everything just goes well for you and me, we'll never call upon him in the day of trouble. If we don't have a day of trouble. You've heard it before. Maybe you've heard it. I have heard it many times. I've heard it said, there is no testimony without a test. So, make it far beyond possible. You know, Jesus wanted this to be an impossible situation. He wanted to make sure that there would be no doubt that this would be a true resurrection of a dead man. Lazarus was dead for 4 days, we find out. We look in verse 17. It says, and when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. The Lord often makes a situation impossible, or he waits for the situation to become impossible. Sometimes he'll show you and me how impossible something is, because we'll try everything to solve it. We'll try everything we can to solve a situation. You and I may try to do everything, and then we fall on our face and we finally say, God, I turn it over to you. The Lord often makes the situation impossible so that you will know, and I will know, that only he could be the answer. In such a case, he doesn't want us to trust in the arm of flesh. What do I mean by the arm of flesh? I mean human strength. Yes, God can use people. God can use a doctor. God can use a minister. God can use your neighbor. God can use your family member. God could use you and me. But there are times where nobody can help. Only he can do it. Those are the times where we see the greatest things happen. Those are the times where we know God is surely in this place. And so the Lord often makes the situation seem impossible because it is impossible. Do you remember he said, without me, you can do nothing. He's talking about real things. There are things we can do with our hands. You know what I'm saying. But without him, we can't see the kingdom of God. Without him, it all is just futile and empty. The Lord often makes the situation impossible so that you and I will know that only He could be the answer. When we will finally recognize that and will call out to Him and cry out to Him. You know, that's how I came to know Him. I had to get to that place when nobody could help me. I tried going to this person and that person, wanting answers to what life is about. Why are we here? What is this all about? Does life have a purpose? Well, I got so despondent and so down, I came to Him in desperation. Yep. He felt a little foolish sometimes too. But I called upon Him in my brokenness. And He answered, just like it said in that verse in Psalm 50. And He answered me, and I saw His glory. Amen. We're going to just stop right here. Next time we'll continue with verse number 17, which I already started to read. So when Jesus came, He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. And you can read the rest of the chapter for yourself. You don't need me for that. But I want to discuss that with you. So we'll look to see you tomorrow, and I hope you'll look to see me. God bless you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.